In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, April 18th, here in South Korea. The US shortens its list of electric vehicles that qualify for federal tax credits. And while Hyundai Motor Group is not on the latest list, pundits remain optimistic about future market prospects. We tell you why. And in a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday, President Yoon Changhu calls for a stern crackdown on drugs in the country amid related recent crimes targeting teenagers. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council fails to reach an accord on a unified response to North Korea's latest launch of a new solid-fuel Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile, with China and Russia placing blame on the US. We start over in the US. The Treasury Department there has shortened its list of electric vehicles eligible for federal tax incentives in line with its Inflation Reduction Act. Now, Hyundai Motor Group is not on the latest list, but market pundits here believe the short-term challenge will lead to long-term returns. Our Choi Soo-young explains.
The U.S. government announced on Monday local time that 16 electric vehicles would be eligible for subsidies of up to $7,500 in accordance with the detailed guidelines of the Inflation Reduction Act. All the 16 selected models are American-made, including Tesla's Model 3 and Model Y, Chevrolet's Bolt and Equinox, and Ford's E-Transit and Mustang. As a result, not only Hyundai and Kia by Hyundai Motor Group, but also Nissan and some American-made electric cars that were originally eligible for subsidies have been excluded from the list. The new guidelines for the IRA have reduced the number of eligible models significantly as battery requirements were strengthened in addition to the final assembly requirements in North America. If more than 50% of the battery parts are manufactured and assembled in North America, a subsidy of $3,750 will be given. An additional subsidy of $3,750 is given when more than 40% of the key minerals are mined and processed in the United States or FTA countries. In this regard, industry officials have analyzed that the decrease in the number of eligible vehicles overall is not the worst situation for South Korea because the number of vehicles getting the benefits has been reduced from over 40 electric vehicle models.
In the long run, South Korea is actually going to benefit greatly from this because the estimates right now are that in a few years, South Korean firms from LG, Samsung, and SK on will make and basically be most of the batteries in the United States, up to 69% of them. And so while there will be short-term challenges for Hyundai and Kia, for South Korean battery manufacturers, this is going to be a boon.
In response to the IRA guidelines, Hyundai Motor Group is speeding up the construction of an electric vehicle and battery plant in Georgia, set to open by 2025, and it is also considering replacing the Chinese-made batteries for the GV70 model with North American-made batteries. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Staying on the economic front, the government here is discussing the fate of fuel tax cuts this week as the current cap on related taxes is soon set to expire. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
With oil prices hitting record highs around the world last year, South Korea has been offering a temporary concession on fuel to ease the burden on drivers. Currently, the tax cut on gasoline is set at 25%, while the rate for diesel is 37%. With the rate set to expire at the end of this month, the government will decide this week whether or not to extend the discounts.
We will make more proactive efforts to review the opinion of the National Assembly from the perspective of the burden on people's lives.
The finance minister's remarks came in response to a request from South Korea's ruling party to the government regarding continuing with the fuel tax cut. With a recent announcement by OPEC Plus about production cuts, oil prices are seemingly on the rebound, with prices in general likely to be affected.
Considering trends in general prices and oil prices as well as the burden on the people, we urge the government to actively consider extending fuel tax cut measures for the time being.
However, the government cannot extend the fuel tax cut indefinitely due to rising concerns about a deficit in overall tax revenue. South Korea recorded its greatest ever on-year tax revenue decline earlier this year. According to the Minister of Economy and Finance, the country's tax revenue for the first 2 months of 2023 came to around 54 trillion Korean won, or $41 billion, roughly $12 billion less than in the same period last year. With tax revenue and rising oil prices in mind, the government may look at a compromise option, meaning further fuel tax cuts at a lower discount rate. 신하영, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, President Yoon Changhu Act has called for a comprehensive campaign against narcotics in the country amid recent drug-related crimes targeting teenagers. Do take a listen.
지난 10년 전까지만 해도 대한민국은 검찰, 경찰은 물론 해경, 보건당국, 세관 등 많은 기관의 협력과 노력으로 마약 청정국을 유지할 수 있었습니다. 그런데 어느 순간부터 정부 당국의 방치로 마약이 국민의 건강과 정신을 황폐화시킬 뿐 아니라 청소년의 꿈과 희망을 파괴하고 있습니다.
Presiding over a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday morning, President Yoon also shared intentions to root out nepotism in the workplace, underscoring its violation of the country's constitution. He also urged relevant ministers to place priority on budget management to ensure productive government spending. On the security front, U.S. defense authorities have reaffirmed their commitment to their allies, including South Korea, amid their ongoing investigation into the rampant disclosure of classified documents. Our Yoon reports.
The suggestion that Washington has been spying on some of its allies, including South Korea, following the recent leak of classified documents, has put the South Korea-U.S. alliance in the spotlight less than 2 weeks ahead of a Yoon Biden presidential summit. During a briefing on Monday, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said an internal review assessment is being conducted and that the Department of Justice is leading an ongoing investigation to better understand the scope and scale of the leaks, including getting a better assessment of what documents exactly were disclosed and where they surfaced online.
The Secretary and senior Pentagon officials continue to convene daily meetings to examine the scope and scale of this disclosure, as well as ensure that appropriate mitigation measures are being taken.
There is also some speculation that the leaked documents are forgeries. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and his South Korean counterpart Lee Jong-sup spoke last week and both agreed that the classified document had been substantially forged. When asked about this, Singh said the situation is under review and refrained from giving specifics. And as to whether Washington would apologize to Seoul if wiretapping allegations turned out to be true, the press secretary reiterated that the U.S. commitment to South Korea is rock solid and that Washington has a positive relationship with Seoul. On the same day, National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby said that there had been no damage to partnerships with allies due to the leaks. Singh added that the relevant departments will provide the secretary with initial findings and recommendations within 45 days to improve the department's policies and procedures related to the protection of classified information. 이은진, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, top diplomats from Washington and Tokyo sat down in the sidelines of the G7 foreign ministers meeting and emphasized the importance of trilateral collaboration among South Korea, the U.S. and Japan to maintain a free and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. During their 20-minute talk earlier on Monday, the officials also reaffirmed the importance of joint efforts in response to threats posed by North Korea and the ongoing warfare in Ukraine. Also, according to a press release by the U.S. State Department, Secretary of State Antony Blinken congratulated his Japanese counterpart Yoshimasa Hayashi for the recent progress on diplomatic ties between Seoul and Tokyo. And over in New York, the United Nations Security Council has failed to reach an agreement over a possible response to North Korea's latest launch of a new solid-fuel Hwasong-18 ICBM, with China and Russia finding fault with the U.S.'s regional military drills. Our Ising-jae has more.
Last Thursday, North Korea fired its solid-fuel Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time. The United Nations Security Council responded by holding an open meeting at UN headquarters in New York on Monday, with the meeting being convened at the request of South Korea, the United States, and Japan. During the meeting, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield strongly condemned North Korea's repeated violations of Security Council resolutions, calling for a united response from the international community on what she called a threat to not just Northeast Asia, but also to world peace and security. Along with the U.S., other UNSC members, including Britain and France, expressed concerns over continued provocations from North Korea. But China again backed its ally, saying that United States military exercises near the Korean Peninsula using nuclear aircraft carriers and B-52 bombers made North Korea uneasy. Russia's ambassador to the UN also slammed the U.S., saying that the UNSC meetings should not be used for political propaganda purposes, adding that additional sanctions against North Korea is illegal and unilateral and would not take into account the desperate situation inside the country. Meanwhile, in a statement carried by the state-run Korean Central News Agency, Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the ruling Workers' Party, Lee Byung-chul, accused the UNSC of engaging in domestic interference against Pyongyang. He also stressed that the North's advanced strategic weapons development is a legitimate self-defense measure aimed at defending itself from threats from the U.S. Lee also slammed the U.S. for calling the North's exercise of rights to self-defense a provocation and threat through the mobilization of the UNSC. The vice chairman is known to have led Pyongyang's nuclear and missile development since the early months of Kim Jong-un's rule in late 2011. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
On the entertainment front, BTS member J-Hope begins his mandatory military service on this Tuesday, becoming the second member of the group to enlist following Jin, who began his service last December. The 29-year-old will begin 5 weeks of basic training at an army boot camp in Gangwon-do province. His enlistment comes as the group's agency Big Hit Music earlier this month announced that he would fulfill his mandatory service as an active duty soldier in the army, but added there would be no ceremony for fans on the day of his entry. J-Hope hosted his last live stream on Weverse, a fan community platform, last Friday to say goodbye. In other news, China's gross domestic product jumped in the first quarter of this year following the end of its zero-COVID policy. According to China's National Bureau of Statistics, on this Tuesday, the country's GDP rose by 4.5% on year. Now, this is higher than an earlier Reuters forecast of 4%, but lower than the country's 5% growth target set for the year at the National People's Congress meeting last month. In the fourth quarter of last year, China's GDP recorded a 2.9% growth. South Korea is playing host to a large group of high school scholars from New York seeking first-hand experiences of K-culture. Our Kim Jong-sil met up with them.
Students from New York wearing traditional Korean clothing, hanbok, are visiting Gyeongbokgung Palace.
1, 2, 3.
They stop at every step to take pictures, as if to capture each moment. On this field trip, a total of 105 students from 5 schools in New York came to South Korea. Democracy Prep public schools teach Korean as a second language and have Korean culture classes. This is because the founder of the school spent time in South Korea and was dedicated to bringing Korean education and culture back to the U.S. One student said she enrolled in one of the schools because of her mother's interest in K-dramas.
When my mom first came to America, she was obsessed with K-dramas. She would watch them on cable, and she wouldn't understand the language, but she would read the subtitles. And she was always really involved in the culture.
Korean is really core to the starting of Democracy Prep, our school, and it's something that we also really value in terms of offering our students a perspective of a culture and language that is not something that they've seen before, most likely. We really value the Korean values around education.
In the afternoon, the students gathered at hiker ground near the Cheonggyecheon stream to experience the more modern side of Korea. Hiker ground is run by the Korea Tourism Organization, which said this is a good opportunity for future generations to build friendships during a year when the two countries are celebrating the 70th anniversary of their alliance.
As you can see, the students are using these sets at hiker ground as backgrounds for their dances, just like K-pop idols.
In a K-pop dance class, students learn how to dance to one of the latest K-pop hits. Many of the students picked up the dance moves quickly and filmed their own music videos.
I think it was a fun experience, but I was a little nervous because it was really short. But I think I'm happy with the overall video. I think it was a good experience that really opened my eyes, and I do look forward to coming back to Korea eventually.
The students we met said they hope to use their knowledge and experience of the Korean language and culture in their future endeavors, and said this won't be their last time visiting South Korea. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
On the tech front, researchers here have developed a motion-sensing robot that looks to bolster safety at construction sites and more. Our Cho Sang-min reports.
Avatar is a film that opened our eyes to the new world of cinema, not just through its colorful and sharp computer graphics, but also with the technological imagination it succeeded in emulating on screen. One of the examples would be the technology that links Jake, the lead character, with the blue-skinned alien creature and makes it move freely according to how he wishes. And recently, local researchers in Korea have succeeded in bringing a part of that technology to actual life. The humanoid robot here makes the exact movements with its fingers, hands, wrist, neck, and waist of a person sitting in the driver's seat from far away. Because the user is wearing a type of headgear with a VR screen attached, he or she can see what the robot sees. The robot can sense the user's motions remotely and either turn on or off a switch, move heavy objects, and even shake hands. The technology is also equipped with highly sophisticated motion sensors and 4 infrared cameras that can detect the user's movements however subtle they are. And the overall user experience of it offers an additional feeling of presence and hands-on experience, as users can feel the weight in their arm when the robot is holding a heavy object. Another example of that would be the trembling of the arm when holding onto an electric drill. The team says all it takes to work is a wireless network to get it up and running. As of now, they have succeeded in operating a robot in Seoul from their Ulsan office.
The robot's vision and the data make it feel as if they are right inside it.
The team say the robot could be used in various hazardous working situations and construction sites, as it can carry out delicate and dangerous tasks. Cho Sang-min, Arirang News.
Flights to and from Korea's southern resort island of Jeju have been cancelled due to strong winds. According to Jeju International Airport, as of 1 p.m., 164 flights, 78 outbound and 86 inbound have been cancelled. A total of 480 flights have been scheduled for today, and accordingly, more flights may be cancelled later in the day. Weather authorities have issued a wind advisory for the island, with areas near the airport noting wind speeds of up to 27 meters per second, roughly similar to those seen during a typhoon. Strong winds are forecast to persist until the evening.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Top Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza Jr. has been sentenced to 25 years in prison in Russia's latest crackdown on opposition figures. The sentence was handed down by a Russian court on Monday on charges including treason and spreading fake news about the Russian army. Kara-Murza is an award-winning human rights activist, a journalist, and a dual Russian-British citizen. The 41-year-old has been vocal in his opposition to Russia's war in Ukraine. He was arrested in Moscow in April last year, just hours after a CNN interview where he said Russia was run by a, quote, regime of murderers. He also denounced Russia's invasion of Ukraine in a speech to the Arizona House of Representatives in March of that year. It was the same month that Russia criminalized criticism of its military. The court's conviction has been denounced by Western governments and human rights organizations. Moving over to Sudan now, at least 180 people have been killed over 3 days of heavy fighting in a power struggle between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The clashes broke out across the country on Saturday local time. The international community has called for peace, with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying there's a shared deep concern among allies. Meanwhile, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development has said that the presidents of Kenya, South Sudan and Djibouti will go to the Sudanese capital of Khartoum to try broker a ceasefire. The violence comes on the back of a proposal that would transition the country's military government to civilian rule and would see the RSF become part of the Sudanese army. The United States Federal Bureau of Investigation has arrested 2 men for allegedly running a secret Chinese police station in New York City's Chinatown. Both men have been charged with conspiring to act as agents for China and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors also charged 34 others who live in China in connection to the case. The operatives allegedly established the station on behalf of the Chinese Ministry of Public Security in early 2022 and harassed Chinese dissidents in the US. But it was closed just a few months later after operatives became aware of the FBI's investigation. The secret station is believed to be part of a global network of such facilities operating in 53 countries. Beijing denies operating the stations and called them service centers for overseas nationals. And finally, in the U.S. state of North Carolina, a man relaxing in his yard had a startling encounter with a wild bear. Surveillance footage from a doorbell camera shows David Oppenheimer relaxing in his lounge chair when the black bear casually strolls next to him. Both froze in shock after noticing each other, with the bear running away after a standoff lasting several seconds. Oppenheimer said that he had received a notification earlier in the day to keep an eye out for a wandering bear, but saw nothing on his outdoor cameras before going outside to enjoy the nice weather. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Quick moving showers rolled in for the morning. It's gradually letting up from central regions, while the south coast and Jeju Island could see rain into Wednesday with heavier showers at 20 millimeters an hour at times. But along with rain, those of us in the west coast and Jeju Island are dealing with strong winds with a wind advisory issued. So Jeju Island will be rainy and windy all day today. Temperature-wise, highs are going up a couple of degrees higher in the capital this afternoon. Then summer warms is ahead for Wednesday in Seoul with an expected high of 27 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, southern provinces are having highs dropping down a couple of degrees lower today, hovering in the low 20s this afternoon. Air quality is normal to good nationwide today and into tomorrow. After today's rain, there will be days with partly sunny skies with occasional clouds, and tomorrow's summer warmth will be short-lived. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That ends our Tuesday afternoon newscast. But do stay with us for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.
정연이한테 음악은 언어예요. 정연이 내면에는 자기만의 음악, 자기만의 색깔이 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 음악으로 모든 것을 다 표현하는 것 같아요.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
K-animation, loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. K-animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-animation, befriending children all over the world.
Nine-year-old Pei Sing-ah was hit and killed by a drunk driver while on her way home. Her last phone call to her mother was to ask for 15 minutes more of playtime with her friends. The 66-year-old driver, for his part, was heavily intoxicated, having drunk 14 bottles of soju and beer with 8 people before getting behind the wheel. So why is drunk driving so prevalent in Korea? Is leniency for crimes committed under the influence of alcohol serving as a license for crime? And what should be done to firmly crack down on drunk driving and its deadly consequences? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today, we address the tragic repercussions of drunk driving and its rampant recurrence amid what some pundits say are ultimately lenient punishments that fail to root out this deadly practice. For more on this, I have Professor Arirang from Kyung University here in the studio. Professor Song, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I also have Professor Cho Hee-kyung at Hongik University live on the line. Professor Cho, it's lovely to speak with you again.
It's good to see you.
Right, Professor Sung, how do you explain the prevalence of drunk driving here in Korea and its tragic consequences?
Well, it's undeniable that Koreans are drinkers. And there has been, unfortunately, a permissive culture where people regarded drinking as part of work, and they go driving as a part of work, and they drink, and then they got on the car. I think that old habits hasn't died. But as I saw the statistics, it's not just old-timers like me, but it seems like younger people having gotten into party situation and then get in the car and just the same. I think that's part of it. And the permissive culture kind of transfers over to the legal restrictions. It's a little bit more permissible than is required, I think. So there has been a number of different factors. I think for a while, I thought having infrastructure like the night buses would alleviate people getting into their own cars. But it does help a little bit, but not as much. So there's a number of conditions that conspire to make Korea, unfortunately, very prone to drunk driving.
Right, really unfortunately, of course. Professor Cho, some pundits claim that our society's relative lenience with regard to crimes committed under the influence of alcohol may be the root of the problem. What do you say?
Well, certainly being under the influence of alcohol for other crimes has acted or has been taken into consideration as a mitigating factor rather than an aggravating factor for other crimes such as assault and battery or even manslaughter and murder. Because if you are acting under intoxication, one of the requirements of a crime, which is the mental element, that you had the intent to commit that crime, that can be essentially abrogated because you could claim that because of alcohol, you didn't know what you were doing or you didn't exactly know what you were doing. But with regard to drink and driving or driving under influence, intoxication is one of the elements of the crime itself. So that itself cannot be used as a mitigating factor. But for a very long time, the punishment that was meted out for drinking and driving was very light in comparison to other crimes and also in comparison to other countries. And as Professor Song mentioned, we do have a rather lax or lenient attitude towards, or used to at least, people drinking and driving, and that certainly contributed to the high incidence of drinking and driving. So for a long time, criminal law didn't really do its job when it came to drinking and driving, which was A, to punish the perpetrator, and B, to act as a deterrent. And it didn't really do a deterrent job very well.
And staying with that, Professor Song, could you walk us through the legal consequences that a drunk driver faces following a related accident, including the appeals process, which I understand leads to a reduced sentence?
Yeah, actually, that's part of the problem. But usually how it goes is that you have a BAC, which is a blood alcohol content, checked out by the police. And if it goes over 0.3, then you're getting into suspension territory, and 0.08, then it's a revocation. So once the police gets that record in the place, they're ready to revoke your license or to suspend your license and give you the notice. And you have a chance to appeal if you choose to. But if not, then either you pay fine or you get your administrative suspensions or revocation in place. As you mentioned, the administrative appeal is something of a mitigating or the tools that people can reduce their punishments. And disturbingly, there are a plethora of advertisement from those professionals saying that if you do this, then there is a higher chance that it will be reduced. Now, the key to have your punishment reduced is a sob story. you had to drive, your livelihood depends on it, and you don't have a prior offenses as much. So all kinds of sob stories that you can come up with, it seemed to work. And on that basis, there has been a kind of a general notion that, well, if you get into trouble, there are ways to maybe not get off scot-free, but at least reduced. So that kind of hopeful scenario for the offenders would not be a good incentive.
I see. And given this reality, Professor Jhope, efforts to enhance the legal penalty of fatal accidents caused by drunk driving include the earlier passing of the Yoon Changhu Act by the Parliament. Now, before we move forward, Professor Jhope, could you tell us a bit about this act and the Constitutional Court's ruling against it?
Yes, the law is actually named after late Yoon Changhu, who was another tragic victim of DUI offense. He was, at the time, a university student serving in the military, and he got hit by a drunk driver, a completely intoxicated driver, and he was in a coma for many days and unfortunately passed away and never woke up. And so the National Assembly passed two different amendments to two sets of laws, one to the road traffic law and also another one to special punishment for certain crimes act, which essentially made the standard of BAC or blood alcohol content level more strict. So previously you had to, I think, reach 0.05 to have your license suspended if you're caught drinking and driving, but it's now been lowered to 0.03. And also the punishment that's available for drinking and driving has been increased so that previously it was between above 1 year up to a maximum of X number of years. But now life sentence is available, and if you actually kill somebody as a result of drinking and driving, now the minimum is 5-year sentence. So the standards have been strengthened, but the problem is the Constitutional Court has actually found this Yoon Changhu law to be unconstitutional in two aspects. The first is that there is a provision in that law which made if you're caught twice drinking and driving, then that would actually merit aggravated punishment because you are a repeat offender. And the Constitutional Court found that that is against the Constitution because it doesn't place any limit as to how long the period could be. You could have committed a drink driving once in your 20s, 30 years ago, and now you are in your 50s and you've had clean record of driving, and you make a mistake or an error, and you're caught, drunk behind the wheel. And they said that's disproportionate, and it doesn't comply with the principle of punishment being relative to the crime. And so they've actually made further amendments to the law as a result.
I see. And Professor Song, what has been the impact of the Yoon Changhu Act on traffic accidents caused by drunk drivers while it was in effect?
Well, it was in effect, as Professor Jhope mentioned, there was public awareness, kind of a wake-up call to a lot of people that drunk driving is a very serious offense. But because of the Constitutional Court revoking or overturning that aggravated punishment section, and the attention span for people in this kind of issue is rather short. So statistics show that the drunk driving accident has gone down a little bit after the passage of the law, but then it come back up. So the impact did not really last long. I think it has to do with the message that the Constitutional Court unfortunately gave that this aggravated punishment is unconstitutional, and people took it as a permission to go ahead and drunk driving.
Right, unfortunately. Professor Jhope, what efforts are being made to perhaps improve the Yoon Changhu Act, to perhaps deal with the unconstitutional element within it as dictated by the Constitutional Court?
So the second aspect that the court found unconstitutional was that the law didn't differentiate between how much the drivers had drunken. So it treated the same whether the driver had 0.5 blood alcohol level or 0.01 blood alcohol level. And so they actually passed some recent amendments to the law, which now distinguishes between different levels of alcohol content in your blood. So if it's now between 0.03 to 0.2%, then you get slightly lighter punishment, as opposed to if your alcohol level is more than 0.02%, then you get much higher punishment. And also, you can take into account your past drink driving record as long as it was within the last 10 years. And those amendments actually have come into force earlier this month, on the 4th of April, in fact. But the problem is, once that law was declared unconstitutional last year, what happened was there were all these retrials of previously convicted people for DUI, drinking, sort of driving under influence. And many of them got their sentences reduced as a result of the Constitutional Court's judgment. And so if you actually search for Yoon Changhu law, the very first entries that you get as a result of your search is all these lawyers advertising their services, how to get your sentence reduced or how to mitigate your offense.
Right, these are the sob stories that Professor Song was talking about.
Indeed, yes.
I see. Personally speaking, Professor Jhope, what are your thoughts on the Yoon Changhu Act?
I think the law is actually heading in the right direction, and it's in the right spirit. But what it didn't do was to, because it was rushed, as most of our legislative activities, it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to this kind of public outpouring of rage over this senseless, accident that tragically killed this young life. And so I think there was not enough thought that went into the law. And so it became a very blunt instrument rather than being more variated and a bit more sort of customized to what it actually needed to do. So as a tool, it was a very blunt tool rather than a more kind of refined tool.
Right, indeed. Professor Song, meanwhile, as part of efforts to protect children within school zones, there is the Minshik law that was enacted about 3 years ago, I believe. Could you tell us a bit about this particular law and its impact? I mean, how effective has it been thus far?
Well, children getting hit by a car at the school zone or the children protection zone is as shocking as it is for any situation like that. So I think that the impact is pretty wide, and because of the efforts by the victims' parents, actually they were saying that the car was speeding, which turned out that it was not. But still, that law woke up people's attention and the focus on protecting the children large enough that the law passed. And what it does is that it puts into some cautionary measures, like the putting the sign in the school zone and reducing the speed of maximum speed to 30 kilometers. And also it goes to the aggravated punishment. So for the drivers, the first notion in looking at the law is that if you cause accident in any manner within the protect the children zone, then your life is screwed. So there was a scare factor at first, but as it turns out, it didn't really pan out that way. The punishment or the appeals overturns has been too frequent, disturbingly enough, so that the impact is not as big as the one we anticipated or wanted.
Right. Professor Jhope, for the sake of comparison, what can you tell us about the legal consequences of driving under the influence in perhaps other countries?
Well, a lot of countries actually have much more strict standards and much harsher punishment than we do. For example, to take in the extremes first, China and Brazil actually have the death penalty available if you kill somebody while driving under influence. Other countries have 0% BAC, so meaning that they have absolutely no tolerance for anyone who's even drunken a drop of alcohol to be sitting behind the wheel. Some other countries take the naming and shaming approach, like Taiwan, where they disclose the identity of a drunk driver who has caused an accident that's injured people. There are many countries that actually have much lower blood alcohol level than we do, starting with 0.0% to 0.2%. And a little bit more sort of clever approach I found were examples like in Australia, where they differentiate among different levels of drivers. So if you're a learner driver or a novice driver, then there's no tolerance at all for alcohol. Your alcohol BAC is 0.0%, whereas if you have some years of experience, then that level gradually gets increased to 0.02 or 0.05. But if you are a driver of public transport or drivers with vehicles that carry dangerous goods, again, the blood alcohol level is limited. And so those are the kind of, I think, different approaches that we can look at to essentially have more variated response.
Right, I see. Professor, some countries, including those in Europe as well as the US, have adopted the ignition interlock devices to discourage DUIs. Now, that being said, what is hindering the adoption of such technology here in South Korea?
Right, that's a case where the technology helps the situation. I mean, I'm looking forward to a ultimate situation where a self-guided car would make this kind of dispute pretty null.
I'll keep my fingers crossed for that.
Right. Until then, that's one of the ways to reduce this kind of tragic situations by using a added function to the car by putting essentially a breathalyzer in your car. And if your BAC goes over certain legal limits, then the car doesn't even start. Now, the thing is, the technology is here. Even it's not an important technology. Korean companies have developed this technology, so we have that in place. And this law, a bill, has been introduced before, too. 2009, I think. It's been about 14 years, but no significant the progress has been made in terms of making into the law. I think there are many reasons. I think people are reluctant to do it. They're putting it into all the cars out there. It's a very hard thing to do. But if you look at the U.S. situation, they've been putting this kind of devices in certain select cars since 1986, I think. So U.S. in total, they see the 19% or so of a reduction in the accidents. And prime, the example in that U.S. scenario is Arizona, where they mandated this devices seven years ago. And their reduction rate is pretty remarkable, so more than 19%. So in terms of putting this technology into use, there's a proven record, and there's a kind of a track record that we can count on. But I think that we have to go over the cultural barriers, people's resistance in making this kind of devices universal. I think it goes back to the cultural issues, people being too permissive in drinking and doing other things, including driving.
Right, and against this backdrop, Professor Jhope, here's the difficult question. What do you propose to prevent drunk driving and its related fatalities here on the local front?
I think strengthening criminal punishment is not really the answer. What we need to do is make it socially unacceptable for people to drink and drive. It's a little bit like Kim Young-lan law, where small bribery was used to be just accepted as something, as like a social lubricant, but now no longer really. And in the same way, I think we have to make it so that if you drink, then it's a complete social modification or an offense to be sitting behind the wheel. You know, car is a great machine that take us to places, but in the hands of a drunken person, it becomes a weapon that can kill people. And we know this, and we have tools to address them and to solve the issue, and yet we don't take them and implement them. And every single time when something like this kind of tragic accident happens, we beat our chest and we say we'll have to do better, we have to strengthen the punishment, etc. But unless we change our attitude towards drinking and driving, just lengthening the sentencing and so forth is not really going to make a big difference. And I think we really have to get them young so that when drivers initially start driving, we have to drill it into their heads that you must not touch alcohol and drive. That's not acceptable.
You're right. I suppose we need a social campaign as well then. Professor Song, what are your suggestions to combat DUIs?
Well, similar opinions, but I think it has to be a combination of different efforts going into place. Punishment is one thing. I think there has to be, in certain situations, zero tolerance. But for other things, it should be harder to overcome the initial conviction or the charges. But also cultural factors as well. I think there has to be a public education and awareness campaign. And also infrastructure, maybe more night buses so that people want to go out and party. Maybe it gets easier to do that. Right? But those kind of things alone cannot make this one go away. I think the technology is also part of it. So until we get to a point where either technology or others can completely eradicate this kind of discussions, we have to put everything, every single efforts into place so that we can reduce more accidents going by, especially when it when it comes to the protection of children. I think there has to be a zero tolerance, and people has to know that aggravated punishment is apt and good punishment on that. And I think every parents in this country will agree on that.
Right, I would have to agree with you as well, to protect our children, of course. All right, Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure.
And Professor Cho, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have today. We return same time tomorrow, that is Wednesday, with a look back at Korea's road to democracy. Join us then.